Good morning. It's Friday, January 28th, 8:30 a.m. And this is the morning session of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. This morning, we're going to start off with introducing a number of bills that have come in the last week or so. And the first sponsor is Senator Randy Brock on S-270, an act relating to housing regulation modernization. We often do it with council present, and then we go to council and they do a more formal walk through the bill after. But because of limited availability of council, we're going to hear all three of our sponsors, and then we will double back and hear all three walkthroughs. So it's not quite ideal, but we're working with the schedule we can put together. So good morning, Senator Brock. Thanks for coming in. My standard question, maybe you've heard it before, is what problem or opportunity did you see, and how does S-270 work? Attack that. So
that's a great question, Senator. It was one that I was hoping that you were going to ask me.
Okay.
And because it's fairly simple, without even going into the details of the bill, although clearly we will. This is designed to help us solve one of the two biggest intractable problems we have in Vermont, and that is the lack of housing, and specifically the lack of affordable housing. And this is designed to help us close that gap.
Well, that's music to our ears, because we're working on Act 250, and one of the major shared concerns, I think, of everyone in the legislature and many people outside is how do we develop Vermont well and build more housing, including affordable housing. So,
and this bill, if there's any summary principle involved, it's to try to improve the timing, and that is to speed up our ability to get affordable housing done both quickly and well. The bill, which I assume you have before you, would you like me to at least touch the high points of it? And Ellen, who is the drafter, when she comes in, can give you the details perhaps behind it.
Yes, that'd be great, because our usual thing is we do have the bill in front of us, but we're doing it a little differently today. So if you can basically do sort of the English language walkthrough and let us know how you're.
Well, the real danger is that I'm not an attorney, and in terms of drafting the bill, so what I tell you may not be true or accurate in any way, shape, or form. Now, with that disclaimer.
Okay, well that's a good way to get started.
What this bill does is really two basic things. The first, it deals with priority housing projects, which, as you know, we have defined as a discrete project located on a single tract or multiple contiguous tracts of land that consists exclusively of, and then it says mixed income housing of mixed use or any combination thereof. And so what the bill does is it strikes the requirement that priority housing projects be located solely within a designated Vermont neighborhood or designated neighborhood development area. It's designed to broaden where priority housing projects could be cited. That said, it focuses on producing housing in areas where there is high demand. High demand is defined here as an area in which a county in which the county's median gross rent is 10% above the median gross rent for the state. In other words, it says that you can define where there is a need for additional housing, if for no other reason, by the cost of housing being exceptionally high. Right now, there is one area that fits that is Chittenden County. And Grand Isle County is actually getting close to that, which the difference between what it costs to rent in those locations and elsewhere. And we're seeing that. I mean, I see that particularly here in Franklin County. I got a call, for example, for a woman day before yesterday who is a nurse at the medical center in Burlington, and she's living in Highgate, with herself and her two kids. And she basically has said that she's moved to Highgate, which is 40, 45 miles, depending upon where in Highgate you are, away from her place of work, because that's the only place that she can get housing that she can afford that's large enough for herself and her kids. And these calls and the observations that I see in which the bedroom communities of Chittenden County have now become Georgia and St. Albans and now Highgate and elsewhere is because there is an insufficient amount of affordable housing, or for that matter, housing generally that's available. So what this does is it says that you can put priority housing projects located elsewhere, and it provides some criteria in terms of defining that. This bill also deals with adding a sales and use tax exemption on building materials that are used in priority housing projects. The third thing, and perhaps the most important thing that, at least in my mind, that the bill does, is it focuses on getting decisions made quickly, or at least within a reasonable period of time. Among the findings in the bill is if you take a look at appeals, and we know that most Act 250 permits are granted within a reasonable period of time, except where there's an appeal. And when there's an appeal, sometimes these things drag on, and the average appeals time, based on the stats we have, is something like 334 days it takes to get an appeal through the process. And what this does is it says, let's establish some time limits by which the environmental court has to deal with appeals, and it sets some standards in here, but it recognizes that you can't do that unless there are the resources available to handle it. And so it adds a limited term environmental judge and environmental judge court clerk using COVID funds to do it, using federal funds to do it. We're told that that is permissible in order to deal with these backlogs and to deal with appeals in the event that the appeals are not dealt with within the time frame that's envisioned here, particularly with the additional resource added. It produces what is effectively a penalty. And the penalty is the refund of the fees paid for the permit. And I think that's an important piece too, the addition of resources, but also some form of penalty, because so often we pass things in which we tell agencies to do things and they don't do them. And then it's penalty free. And what this says is there ought to be a cost associated with failing to do what we've asked them to do. That essentially is the bill in a nutshell.
Okay, great. Well, seems like you've given it a lot of thought as to how you might identify areas under pressure. Can you go back to that piece a little bit? Was it median gross income for the county?
No, it's the rent. It's the
rent,
median
sorry.
rent.
Okay, median gross rent, if it's more than 10% or more than the statewide average.
Correct.
Okay.
And there again, it's just focused on where are we having a problem? And generally speaking, we're having a problem statewide. I don't think there's any question about that. Everywhere in the state is having a problem dealing with housing. But where we notice it most obviously is where the rent is exceedingly high. And as a result, people are having to drive far, far away from the places that they work in order to get housing, particularly affordable housing. And this, becomes a hardship on the employee, as in the case of the woman from Highgate that I mentioned. It becomes a problem on housing availability in the areas outside of that, and tends to perpetuate driving up costs. And that's why I think we're seeing this happening or close to happening in Grand Isle as well. And it obviously puts more cars on our highways. And so it adds to our pollution problem as people have to drive far, far away from where they work in order to get a job and to maintain a job.
Sure. Yeah. As much as I enjoy going for rides sometimes, I often call, the car the curse of Vermont. You pretty much have to have one, and you end up spending an inordinate amount of time driving.
Can I make just a quick aside on that, just
Sure.
as an observation about data? one of the things we were talking about, on joint rules and so on, was the notion of having our joint committees being required for a long period of time this summer to meet in person. And so you'd have like joint rules meeting for a 2-hour meeting, and you have somebody from Brattleboro, depending upon the weather, has to spend
Right.
4 hours to attend a 2-hour meeting on the road.
Right.
I just calculated the amount of carbon that the Joint Rules Committee alone used while meeting this summer. And it is unbelievable. It was 3.1 tons of carbon to have this 8-member committee meet in person for these 2-hour meetings this summer.
All right. Well, I bet you could get some even more ironic statistics if you had the different sort of climate council meetings held in person and people traveling. Did you consider whether or not, as you thought about where it would be appropriate to, so when you do a priority housing project, you're also exempt from Act 250. So that's one of the attractions to some developers. Given that I think we all want to see more housing and we also want to see it well done, did you consider whether or not a criterion for eligibility should include that the town has a town plan?
I did not include that as a town plan, but what I did do is included the review process that we have so that there is a review and findings by the district commission.
Okay.
And that's the compensating control.
So can you say, a little more about how, if you are, so currently PHPs are exempted from Act 250 review. So we're conscious of this. We're also trying to figure out in what way could we incentivize PHPs, but just help assure that they are well planned, well sited, et cetera, the kind of things that come up in a normal Act 250 process. So if you're exempted from Act 250, who do you see doing the work? That's why I inquire about whether there's a certified municipal plan that addresses housing.
Well, we would assume, at least I did for purposes of this bill, and obviously I'm open to other thoughts, amendments, and so on to provide that assurance. But I was hoping that the assurance is contained in Section 6 of the bill, which requires a development in a high demand county, which adds to the requirement for a development or subdivision is designated downtown, for which the district commission has issued positive findings and conclusions under Section 6086B of this title on all the criteria listed in that section. And so that's where the charge is for the review.
Okay, so thank you. We'll have to look into that with council and see what that delivers as a process compared to the normal process. So,
I think, my intent in all of this is not to reduce the needs for environmental compliance by doing this. But my focus is on trying to do something that solves this problem now, because we have a problem that is of an emergency and a time-sensitive basis. And that's the focus, and that's why.
Sure. How about, you were citing some statistics. I'm a little surprised that only Chittenden County currently qualifies.
That's what I was told as of yesterday. Again, it's one of my disclaimers is that this was written some time ago.
Sure.
I wanted to check and make sure that that's correct. But that's my understanding as of the information I received yesterday when I asked for an update.
Yeah. Well, you were mentioning how Franklin County is becoming, increasingly a bedroom county to folks working in Chittenden County, which makes sense. I mean, we have kind of the same experience down here, maybe a little less because we don't in Addison County, because we don't have an interstate connecting us. We just have Route 7.
Yeah.
Are your towns or developers in your county coming to you and saying, we'd love to do more PHPs? I'm just trying to have a sense if you're hearing about opportunities and people are saying they're somehow getting caught up in a review process that's preventing them from going ahead and building in Franklin County.
Well, I certainly have heard, and I've heard this almost everywhere, is that their Act 250 and all the requirements associated with it takes time and it takes money and it adds to the cost of doing things. And we recognize that there's, of course, a trade-off between getting what we as a state want and then what we as a state, in terms of our people, can afford to pay.
Right.
That is always a trade-off that we do. And what I'm hoping with this is to get a middle ground that will help us get to our objective of housing the people that we need, because that's the only way, that's at least the principal way that we're also going to deal with some of the demographic problems we have. We've got all kinds of problems, issues that we're working on in economic development, in which we're trying to add to the workforce in Vermont by attracting people from elsewhere, by getting military retirement retirees to either come to or to stay in Vermont, to make this an attractive place to work so that we can fill out our medical community, particularly our nurses and so on. We can't do that if they come here and there's no place for them to live, which is why this is so critically important.
Sure. Do you talk with JFO at all? Request a fiscal note? Do you have any figures related to the tax expenditure related to waiving sales and use on materials?
I do not. I take that back. I don't have that current information as of today. I think I had some preliminary numbers earlier, but it does need the JFO review does need to be done. Yes.
Sure. Okay. All right. Any committee questions for Senator Brock? Senator McDonald?
Is it too late to close I-89?
Well, we would simply, I think, have a problem on Route 7 that will add to
no,
that.
because you would. Well, that only assumes that you'd have. Senator McCormick yesterday said that if you want looking for the root of the challenges we're trying to resolve, it's based on making the automobile the dictator of where people live, and we're now trying to correct that with.
Well, the alternative that I see
mandated
based on that is we could have people sleep in their cars. That way they wouldn't have to drive to Franklin County, but they've got to sleep
That
somewhere.
would be-
That's the problem that we need to
No,
solve.
but that's the market solution. Yeah, yep, no, that's the market solution.
I think we're reaching the end of a legislative week. All right. Any other questions or comments for Senator Brock? Well, thanks for thinking about it, because obviously we're all interested in this issue, and you have some novel aspects of your proposal. So Senator McCormick.
Yeah, when I was an undergraduate, I was about 19 years old. I was briefly homeless, and I slept in my car in the college parking lot so as to be on time for class. And a kindly guard used to wake me 15 minutes before class time.
Was that at the University of Florida?
Hofstra, Long Island.
So it was a little chilly.
Yeah, and I don't remember what our mascot was. I don't even remember what the school mascot was.
Okay.
Well, if there are no, so thank you, Senator Brock, for coming in, and you've given us food for thought, and we're working on this very issue, in concert, trying to go develop something that's basically hand in glove with what comes out of economic development. And I've stayed in pretty close touch with Senator Sirotkin about, just so that the two committees know which pieces each could handle. The idea, though, is in the end, we bring something that integrates well forward as a pair of committees. So,
because I think that's so important, because one of the worst things we could do is be successful in economic development and get a whole bunch of people to move to Vermont, and then there's no place for them to live. That's what we don't want to see happen.
That's what we've done.
but yeah, I don't know to what degree housing, in chemistry, you talk about the limiting reagent. What of all the reagents coming together limits how much of what you make in the end? And I don't know if our limiting reagent in this equation is housing. if we worry about people not moving here or staying here, if it's the lack of housing or the inaffordability of housing. So, right. Okay, well, if there are no further comments or questions, while Senator Brock's here, thanks for introducing S270. And since Senator Parent is here, we might as well switch up the batting order and we'll go right to you so that we're not keeping you out of your other morning committee. Thank you, Senator Brock.
Much.
Hi everyone, how are you? I will state Franklin County is a Lowe's or a Home Depot away from me never needing to go to Chittenden County. Both my wife and I work in Franklin County, so we don't make that commute down the interstate. And since we're not going to Montpelier, I don't even drive through it much.
So you're not feeling like a bedroom county to.
No, I actually think we're going to see the opposite start to happen. And my bill actually, the 278 kind of speaks to some of the challenges we're having, the opportunities we have to reverse that trend.
Okay, so as we get started, just to help people who may be watching follow, your bill is S278, an act relating to airport expansion and primary agricultural soil mitigation. We usually have, council was unavailable, so we're doing a walkthrough of your bill, Senator Brock's bill, and I have one. Council will be joining us in
I'd also recommend
a little later.
If you're going to take this up, this is actually with a lot of work with Trini at VTrans and with Michelle Boomhauer. Okay. So as you guys may or may not know, the Burlington Airport effectively is full for tenants and land around it, and we have a number of other airports. I believe every county in the state of Vermont has a state-owned airport. And really looking at what the future of economic development is, and particularly in the Franklin County Airport, Highgate is right between Montreal and Burlington. It's really close to Plattsburgh, and that corridor has created a really big aerospace industry, including, the great company like Beta Technology that's looking to solve, with the electric helicopter, and they're expanding in that triangle as well, and looking to in the future. The Franklin County Airport, just by background and why this bill comes up, the community of Highgate has invested with a Northern Borders grant and with a little bit of money from the state last year. They just passed a bond for up to $3 million to extend water and sewer out to the airport. The FAA, Senator Leahy, has got an expansion of the runway. I've noticed from private developers, they're buying up airspace easement along this way. The goal effectively here is we're at an industrial space in Chittenden County, and particularly along the Burlington Airport. There's an opportunity here to put an industrial park along the Franklin County Airport. I think the Berlin Airport has future opportunities, and so it's not just for one airport. The bill's written for every airport across the state. But the goal ultimately is to allow that land to be utilized to its full ability. And because it's the space, I think here in this particular case, they're looking to buy the state's looking to do a land swap with a private sand pit, and turn that, it's an exhausted sand pit, but turn that into some space that can be utilized for the airport. And it's part of the larger master plan of the airport. The problem is the cost that's getting hung up is this ag soil mitigation right along the airport. And so VTrans, they've been talking to me it came up late, I think the 2020 session. Last year we had language drafted and we talked to Mazza and we took it up in ag, tried to see if it might make sense, but it was late in the session. And so VTrans and I decided this year just to put it in as a standalone bill. And ultimately the goal is as long as it's state-owned airport, it's a development or subdivision is a result of land acquisition, improvement, or maintenance under 5 VSA 15.6, and I don't know what that is, or subdivision that is authorized by the Federal Aviation Administration Airport Master Plan for the state-owned airport. and that the state-owned airport obtains any permit or permit amendment that may be required under Act 250, that the ag soil mitigation piece is removed. So you still have the permitting piece. Obviously, it's on state-owned land. We're not looking to do this in any kind of a private airport if one were to come up, but this is really just trying to best utilize the land we have around our current airports. And if things play out well, potentially, I've heard from Canadian companies that potentially would look to come in and use this airport. We've heard from some carriers, think like, FedEx, UPS, Amazon, those types that could potentially come in. I think Beta also, maybe a future expansion could be an opportunity at this airport because they're out of space in South Burlington. So we're just trying to get, almost think of like a downtown kind of special easement. Like if we're going to do development, let's try to make it as dense and as close to these airports as possible and as affordable and make it work financially.
So is the footprint of the airport slated to expand? And so it's the new land brought in
Yeah.
that's classified as ag soils, and therefore then there's a mitigation requirement or an offset.
Yeah.
And
so like in this example in Highgate, the potential like here, so Franklin County Field Days has been using the state land, and that's part of this. So like the state's already we're gonna have to, I've started bringing up in institutions, find land for the future Franklin County Field Days if this plan carries through, because they'll need to move it. So the state already will effectively be conserving or turning another piece of land into a fairground,
right,
for this project. But yeah, V-Trans probably can go into more detail why this is specifically needed. But it's something, they brought to me obviously as a Franklin County senator and Randy with the need at the Highgate Airport. I think that's just one that has the biggest commercial opportunity in the near future, just with its proximity. It's right off the interstate, which is right off, it's 10 minutes from the Canadian border. So a lot of these Canadian companies look for a US domicile so they can get US government contracts. And so there's just a lot of opportunity at this airport. And would effectively help, from our perspective, keep some of there are 10,000, the last I heard, there are 10,000 people a day who get on that interstate and head south to Chittenden County. This would help keep them in Franklin County and hopefully someday and with jobs here.
Sure. Something you're saying reminds me of, I forget what it's called, like an international trade zone.
Right.
If you're within a certain distance of the border, would this possibly qualify for that sort of treatment?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't think it has it yet, but they do a lot of like a no trade areas. Like I know I did a trip up to Canada and did some US Canadian relations stuff a number of years ago, and they were talking years ago, but an example of this was Detroit and Windsor, that vehicle parts would cross the US Canadian border like 6 times before a vehicle was put together. And so they had like a no trade zone because they didn't want to get hit on tariffs on each of those transactions. But yeah, this has the opportunity, to allow us to compete better with Plattsburgh, New York, which has pulled in some of these companies. And honestly, I think, the goal I think we're all preparing for is if like the beta type companies take off, they're going to need eventually more space. And they already have facilities in Plattsburgh and Montreal, and this kind of fits into a corridor they could be in, and it would keep Vermont competitive to bring those clean, green, high-paying jobs, to the northwest corner of Vermont.
Right. It's my understanding that Beta is, that the Burlington Airport is, the land is so used already that finding a significant size new campus for manufacturing has been a challenge.
And that's honestly, that's our local regional goal is to be able to provide that space if a company like that needs it in an airport that would make sense for, this airport's only about 45 minutes from the South Burlington Airport. So it makes a lot of sense for companies.
Is there commercial traffic in and out of it already?
No, it needs a runway expansion, which the federal government is doing. A buddy of mine just closed yesterday with the FAA. He had to sell everything 75 feet and above over his business across the road from it. So they are planning a water and sewer expansion out here. There's no water and sewer infrastructure. So we've invested in that locally and with state dollars. And then the federal government's doing the runway expansion over the next couple of summers. So the work's getting done at the airport, and V-Trans can give you guys the detail on that. This is to allow that commercial development, more of it. But we're getting the airport ready for it.
Okay. Who is the lead on this? Is this like the Franklin County Economic Development Corp or something like that? Or?
So Franklin County Industrial Development Corp's working on it. ACCD, I know that they're working heavily on it. It's a priority of theirs. The town of Highgate, the town of Highgate, they went out to bond in a very conservative town, and it was a lot of talk with the community. As for the schools, the schools involved because they look at setting up a tech center potentially for aerospace type jobs at Missisquoi Valley Union. So, but the lead I would say is really been the town of Highgate and ACCD, and then V-Trans because this is a V-Trans project. Yeah. For now. So like I said, Trini Broussard and Michelle Boomhauer, I know have been talking to me about this bill for some time.
And do you have a contact at ACCD for this?
Yeah, I can get you Tate Brooks is who I've worked with, but I don't know if he would be the one to come into the committee or not. It might be, Lindsay or
sure
whatnot. So
okay.
But Tate would be a good person to reach out to.
All right. Trying to think of sorry, I've been asking all the questions here. Any committee questions for Senator Parent? Do you know if we've done this elsewhere? I'm thinking of Rutland, for instance. Did you look at what happened down in Rutland?
So the way this bill is written, we haven't, but the way this bill is written, it would apply to all state airports because I realize, if Bennington has an opportunity to expand or Addison County Airport or Rutland Airport or any of these, this is written to apply to all state airports. I'm just using Franklin County because that's the one I know, that example, but, so this could help Coventry. It could help all of them. And the goal is to try to see this kind of, these high tech space and, jobs, pop up all across the state if we can. We're just fortunate to be getting an expansion right now, but I'd love to see it happen all across the state.
What's your sense of the community engagement so far? A bond is one indicator, but in a certain way, also airports come with the controversy of noise, et cetera.
Yeah, so the landowners that I've talked to have all negotiated their deals. There hasn't been any holdouts that I know of. So there's support there. The town of Swanton is very supportive. They're the ones who had to give the wastewater and water allocations to the town of Highgate. They've been engaged and supportive. There were a lot of community meetings this summer about the expansion. The full select board in Highgate supports it. The town administrator, the bond voted. Town of Highgate's a conservative town. I think Bernie Sanders lost to Zupan last time he ran in Highgate. So just think of like a town like that doesn't have to spend. The bond was nervous at first because people are like, they don't have a deal in place. So they're like, we're floating this amount of money, not guaranteeing anything's coming in, and they passed it. So they had a special vote just for this in September and got the turnout and passed it. The school is very supportive. That was the one because the school is actually adjacent to this property, the high school. And that was one of the concerns was the school, but the school sees it as a real big opportunity to, maybe to grow a tech center there or to grow a tech facility with future growth. And then honestly, most of the other land surrounding this is sand pit space. This is, it's got a deep vein of sand, about 10 years left in most of them, but this is where the state's pulling a lot of their sand out of. So when we talk about ag soils, there's no agriculture going on around this airport. People are digging up and extracting the sand is what's going on. but it's been all supportive. Obviously there's an expansion of the Highgate border crossing underway with the federal government. This plays into that too, because the A35 is going to be attaching in about 3 years. So 89 is going to connect all interstate to downtown Montreal. It's already shortened the trip. You can get from my house without traffic. If you don't do traffic, you can get to Montreal in less than an hour, and this should shave another 10 minutes off that. So I'll be closer to downtown Montreal sitting where I am than to Montpelier. So this is, I think, an exciting opportunity for our part of the state because we're so close to a world-class city. But everyone seems to be supportive. We haven't heard a ton of concerns. The select board, there are a few businesses that concerns were, well, if a big business comes in, how are we going to have the people for the jobs? But that's just a concern in the whole economy. And, whatever business that moves in would have to figure out before they moved in. But it's been supportive. I mean, that's why we're the Franklin County delegation. This is our top priority. There's a House companion bill to it. This airport as a county delegation is, there was $1 million in last year's budget earmarked specifically for this water line expansion. So this has been an ongoing project for us as a delegate, nonpartisan, just for our county. We're all pushing for it.
So it's not just for you and for Randy for your campaign plane. It's
No.
just everybody, but your campaign plane is there now.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's for everybody.
Everybody's on board. It's just not for, okay.
Yeah, and Highgate, this would be a big win for that town. We see it for a big win for a lot of those northern towns that have really been kind of economically depressed for a while. This is an opportunity to really change their story.
Right. Well, as long as it doesn't compete with Sears Campion or Campion Sears International Jetway in Bennington County.
And most people, we call it the Franklin County Airport, but I just learned last year its official name is actually the Warren A. Austin Airport, which is Warren Austin was the first ambassador to the United Nations, and he's a United States Senator from Franklin County. So I actually think we ought to celebrate that a little more because most people don't know who Warren Austin is, but he's a pretty incredible figure.
Interesting.
Got a portrait in the State House on the stairway down from the ceremonial office. Senator McCormick.
Thank you. I don't know if it's an apocryphal story that Warren Austin at one point, speaking of the Middle East, said it's time for the Jews and the Muslims to sit down and settle this in a true Christian fashion.
Okay. It is
with a straight face.
All right. Any other apocrypha or not? Any other stories, comments, questions?
I missed the stories of this committee. I missed my notes with Senator McDonald. Yeah. I get Senator McCormick in the afternoon in institutions now. So,
well, there'll be an opening for next year if you're interested. We're looking. We've got some
we got it. So I've been in the Senate, 4 committees in my 2 terms, and 3 of them have not had women on them, including this one last term now. And then I think the only one who's on. I don't serve with any women senators morning or afternoon on my committee. So maybe we should look for one of our women senators to join this committee.
Yeah.
I've been recruiting for at least 2 cycles, but who knows how all these assignments are made in the end.
Institutions is not just all male, with the exception of Senator Parent, it's all old men. And what I've said is that Corey is an old boy in training.
Yeah, been that way for a while. Thank you guys for your time, and let me know if I can help get any other names. I hope you do take it up as part of even a standalone or as part of a package. I know it would be helpful to our county.
Right. So you mentioned that there's a companion bill in the House. Do you have any sense of how that's tracking?
So they took it up this week. And I know VTrans reached out it's in agriculture in the House. They had some questions, and I know VTrans was reaching out to them. So I don't know how it's tracking, but I will, I'll find out and let you guys know how that's going there. Okay.
The crunch we end up in. So it got its original referral was to ag.
Yeah. I don't know how all these bills, sometimes they end up here or there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Well, great. Well, good to see you again.
good to see you.
And,
Thank you.
See you later.
we'll- Thank
See you later.
All right. So with that, I think, Jude, can you remind me? I know we've revised the schedule. What time is Ms. Murkowski scheduled to arrive?
9:30.
9:30. Okay. So the third bill that we can have the sponsor introduction for is S 272, an act relating to entities required to comply with the Vermont renewable energy programs. And that's a bill I put in. So it plainly translated, we found ourselves in an awkward position in terms of being able to respond to the Global Foundries interest in becoming a self-managed utility. And I think probably one of the bigger concerns this committee expressed was that their desire to be named as such and classified as being eligible for de minimis regulation included being exempted from things like our renewable energy standard. And because they represent 8% of the power in the state and 10% of GMP's load, if they were to step out, that removes them from addressing climate goals that we've said every utility has an obligation to participate in addressing. I know they have other thoughts on how they might do that, but that particular application. So two things have happened. They're on a docket right at the PUC, and the PUC is deciding whether they have jurisdiction and will even move ahead to formally consider issuing a CPG. But meanwhile, I had pointed out when I wrote to the PUC about this that even at the level of the name of this new entity, self-managed utility, we already have self-managed energy efficiency programs, the SMEP program, which IBM and then Global Foundries subsequently has brought to the legislature, and they've managed it through the legislative process, and we've amended statute to address those requests and concerns. So without getting into some sort of legal discussion of the ins and outs of what they're doing in a docket, I think the goal here is to offer through this bill, it guarantees us a place to work on this issue directly. So I think part of what I was saying to Global Foundries when writing to the PUC is, you've come to us before and we've worked on things together and come out with workable solutions. This is really seems much more akin to lawmaking to me than just simple utility orders. They're creating a novel entity, and I would say the creative aspect belongs to the legislature. That's my way of saying it in English. The lawyers can help us parse it far, far more finely and expertly than I can. At any rate, so in order to not be sort of out in the cold and see other applications like the Global Foundries one come forward and have us not have any way to address them, I put this bill in, and it's really quite simple. It says that it entails every utility participates in the energy efficiency programs of the state of Vermont. And Ellen will give us a walkthrough in the legal detail of how that's actually implemented, but that's the goal of the bill. And I hope that Global Foundries does consider actually coming back to the legislature to look at any kind of alternatives to their current situation as GMP's largest current customer, and therefore obligated through their provider to participate in the state's energy programs. The other thing is that if Global Foundries were to go, say it works out, they go ahead, it does beg the question, why wouldn't other large customers decide to come forward and say, in essence, we want to engage in something that's retail choice. Now, it's been pointed out to me that Global Foundries is actually declaring itself to be a utility, and therefore it can't engage in retail choice because it's sort of by nature wholesale. But when the utility itself is also the consumer of all the power it purchases, I would say it's engaging in retail choice in a de facto sense, right? They're not buying the power and holding it, they're buying the power and using it, consuming it, and it's consumers that are the ones that are engaged in the retail transactions. So to me, it's like a difference. What's the lawyerly phrase? Sir McCormick, you might have it. It's a difference without a distinction. I think that might be it in this case. So the kinds of folks that might come forward, why not UVM Medical Center and UVM campus pair up? That's a huge portion of Burlington Electric's load. That would be highly disruptive to BED. There are large accounts like ski areas in VEC territory. Should they choose to step out and become self-managed utilities, how disruptive would that be to VEC? And so you can walk around the state and find large loads here and there. And if they were all to start doing this, I think it would be very disruptive to the state achieving its energy goals. And because we'd have multiple customers declaring themselves to be self-managed utilities and therefore no longer obligated. So that's a long preamble, but to a bill walkthrough, but that's what's behind it. Senator McCormick.
Thanks. Yeah, just an observation. I mean, I see two, I'm a co-sponsor on this bill, and I see two issues. One is environmental, it's just, how much leeway are we giving to someone whose activities by definition raise environmental questions, which is not to say that they're bad activities, just that they have environmental issues that need to be looked at. But the other one is just the proper roles of various branches of government. I mean, you just touched on it, Mr. Chairman. I think you're right, which is should the PUC be deciding this or should the legislature? And it's, there's the going way back 20 years to the Brigham decision, which has an entirely different issue. It was on education funding. But the Vermont Supreme Court made the very good point, and it's established law that government may delegate authority. We may not delegate responsibility. The authority of the PUC is a delegation from the legislature. They're a creation of the legislature, and their powers are a grant from the legislature. But the ultimate responsibility is still ours for environmental protection. And in this case, we have a policy regarding energy generation and global warming implications and other environmental implications. Delegating that to a company is, may be, in my view, delegating responsibility as well as authority. And I don't know if we can do that constitutionally.
I think one of the, as best I understand it, sort of foundational legal questions is the ground we're standing on in terms of comes down to statutory interpretation. Is the PUC allowed to do everything that we specifically say they can do, or can they do everything other than what we tell them they can't do? In this sort of a And so how far?
What is the delegation? What have we delegated to them?
What's the, so I don't.
Nothing.
So we will hear from council more on the question. And we don't really need to, I mean, the PUC is sorting this issue out. They've want to call, give credit to them because they've asked a number of questions to help clarify what the presentation really is, that, what the options are on the Global Foundries permit. There's been a lot of testimony back and forth. So I want to thank them for being so careful on all this. We'll see what their ruling is. Regardless of that ruling, I would still prefer to have this customer and any other potential future customers work through the legislative process for the reasons a number of reasons, including that there's such a body of law around the way we regulate utilities that affects the common good. Senator McDonald?
The analogy of school funding was brought up, and I before, as it was being brought up, I was writing, the PUC has before it a docket that would create gold utilities. And they would operate in the electric arena the same way that gold towns operated in the education of our children. Creating a gold utility is a policy decision. It's not a balancing of it's a policy decision. And I think the legislature is charged with policy decisions. And we should we sit here and watch the PUC engage in policy conditions and create things that don't currently exist. So I think that's our dilemma.
Right. I also would say, what feels sort of legally uncomfortable in terms of this relationship with an administrative agency is the notion of having the parties negotiate alternative environmental regulations or management systems for themselves. Now, I get that there's more than one way to reduce emissions, and process emissions are a larger part of the footprint from this particular applicant's site than the emissions associated with the electricity they're consuming. So it seems like an idea with merit, should be explored, but creating a regulatory construct that the legislature hasn't reviewed or endorsed and integrated into our statutory requirements around greenhouse gas emissions, for instance, also seems novel and troubling to me. Like this is, in essence, as you're saying, it's a policy decision that leads to a program, and those originate with the legislature, unless we've explicitly laid something out and asked others to do that on our behalf.
Are you suggesting, Mr. Chair, that the applicants before the PUC are seeking to create a utility which is above the current law and allows that utility to behave without performing and undertaking the responsibility that current law would require them to perform?
Well, if they were called an ordinary utility without this special conditions that they're asking for, they're proposing to be exempt from areas of current law in the way they operate relative to other utilities. And the bill, as Mr. Murkowski can explain in terms of how it does this, it precludes creating this sort of, at least as best I know, precludes creating this sort of utility outside of the current law and without obligations that the other utilities have. again, I want to go
Doesn't the-
back and say that it's a friendly bill in that it invites people to the legislature to participate in the process to solve whatever problems they think they have. So Senator McCormick or Senator McDonald?
I've got to confess, as a co-sponsor of the bill, I'm not clear on exactly how it works. I hope that Ellen will go over this, but are we inviting people to the legislature because we would prefer they come here? Or are we making clear that we write the law because we derive our just powers from the consent of the governed? I mean, we're the legislature. We write the law. No one else writes the law. Even the governor can ask us to write certain laws and agree or not agree, but we are law. We write the law. What was it? I am music. I write the songs.
Yeah.
I am legislator. I write the law.
Right. Well, so yeah, to that extent, it says that the law will not, the statute, current statute would be amended in such a way that the current sort of novel interpretation of existing statute that is the foundation of the current application before the PUC, you would not be able to make that application if this were to pass. And well, the reason I say invitation is because it's not a hostile act on our part. It is, I'm saying, I'm pointing out the history. We've already responded in the past, and I think it's appropriate that this body continue to respond to utilities that want to see a change in the law and going forward as well. That's all.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, this business of friendly and hostile and all that stuff. Has Global Foundries gone to the PUC to be exempted from what we, or some of us here in the legislature, would consider to be current law? And then once they get to the PUC is in a position of saying, well, it's not our business. It's the legislature's business to authorize such lawful changes. Or is the PUC caught on the dilemma of saying, hey, if we rule in favor of this, now we're in charge? Hasn't the PUC been put in this sort of a difficult position of accepting this new authority or whatever?
It's a novel legal situation, and I'm not a lawyer, and so I think I would really not feel comfortable trying to characterize precisely what the legal status of their application is or how it would work relative to current statute. And that's why we'll have our lawyer in to help us sort that out. But so I'm going to leave it.
If I were on the PUC and someone came to me and said, you guys, you, McDonald, you and your colleagues ought to be in charge of this instead of those people. They don't know what they're doing. Go ahead, rule and make yourself in charge of this. That'd be pretty persuasive. I mean, I'm not made entirely of humble pie, Mr. Chair. I might just say, bring it on. I can run this thing better than the legislature. They're a bunch of clowns.
Well, I think probably at this point, I'm going to go back to where I was with when we have Ms. Murkowski in here. We'll walk through the bill, and I think some of your questions around the legal status of the application, she can give you a more precise answer. So, and because it is under review across the street, I want to be careful not to be sort of interfering in that discussion. They'll do their work. We'll see what comes out. I don't think we're that far away from hearing a ruling because I think they gathered in all the answers they needed, as best I know, roughly 6-8 weeks ago. Sometime in November was a sort of a round of final filings. And now I think they're working their way through the record and going to make a decision. I had heard that that decision might be anywhere from the second half of January into February. So we'll have an answer. Meanwhile, this bill seeks to clarify the status of the legislature's role, at least going forward. They've already made an application. That's it. It is, why don't we, if there's no more discussion, or Ms. Murkowski is supposed to be here momentarily. So
Yeah, I emailed her, but I haven't heard back because she is in another committee, but
okay,
she said 9:30 might work, so I'll wait to hear from her.
okay. If not, we can take a 5-minute break and come back. Sarah McCormick.
Well, they'll be trying to talk about this. Let's take the break.
Okay, so it's 9:30. Let's just take a 5-minute break. I'm hoping the council arrives momentarily, and then we'll restart. We'll discuss this bill and the other two that were introduced this morning. Have some committee discussion on next week and Act 250 and environmental justice, and then we will wrap